Hi, welcome to Changing Minds. I'm your host, Nicola Rayhani. Today, we're going to be talking with Pete Dyson, who is the Senior Behavioural Strategist at Ogilvy, about nudging prosocial behaviour. Hi, Pete. Welcome to Changing Minds.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Hello. We can't quite see you yet. Hang on, let me just unpin my thing. Aha, there we go. Good.
Hello.
Cool.
Thanks for having me.
Hello. Yeah, no, thanks for joining us. So I think today we're going to be talking specifically about nudging prosocial behaviour. And that seems massively relevant at the moment in the situation that we're in, where loads of the mitigation measures for against coronavirus do depend on nudging people into or encouraging people into behaving prosocially. So, for example, staying at home when you might rather do something else, or wearing a face mask that protects other people. All of these things are, broadly speaking, prosocial, right? And so this seems massively relevant for what we're living through right now. But what kinds of prosocial behaviors have you been interested in?
Yeah, it's very relevant now, and the pandemic has thrown into sharp relief the fact that we all rely on each other and we're all very much connected, whether that be in health and wellness. But I mean, climate change is coming, is looming large, and it requires cooperation, not just through laws, but also through guidance and sort of elements of voluntary behaviour change. So over the time I've been working at Ogilvy, had the good fortune to work across many areas, including safety, food waste, charitable donations, recycling, and most recently in the transport space. So keen to share some experiments that we've run and see how we can widen the toolkit that's used.
Brilliant. So I guess naively, you might sort of think that one way to get people to do prosocial things is to emphasize the fact that these things are prosocial. I mean, we sort of know that people or lots of people do like to be seen as a prosocial individual, and they like to think that they're doing the right thing or a thing that helps other people. But in fact, sometimes sort of priming those prosocial motives might not be the most effective way to get people to do things. Is that right?
Yeah, the behavioural science literature and also the experiments we've run seem to be quite conclusive in their conclusion, if nothing else, that we should challenge the assumption that the reason a company or a brand or a government or even a parent, the reason they want someone to do something needn't necessarily be the reason that that person then goes on to do that thing. And there's a default assumption that if it's a sustainable behavior, then we need to get people to engage with that thing because of its sustainability, or precisely because of a relatively narrow definition of what that piece of altruism would look like.
Right. So do you want to kick us off by telling us then a bit about one of the interventions that you ran? I think you mentioned the first one we might talk about, increasing charitable donations.
Yeah, we had a really good fortune to work with a charity called Christian Aid, a UK-based charity who do effectively in every year a Christian Aid Week, which is one of the UK's largest door-to-door donation drives. It raises money for disaster relief efforts each year that change. And in the year that this was run, the response was to the Haiti natural disasters in both the immediate response and increasing preparedness. And they go door to door, often in May each year, and they deliver, ostensibly leaflets, but envelopes that allow people to put money in those envelopes, and then some days later, someone comes back and collects them if any money's been put in. So an unusual method, not an online method, not a sort of mail-in method, but it stood the test of time over many, many decades. So
And
our
how
trial was,
effective is that usually? Like if you were to get, so the average envelope dropped through a doormat, how many people respond to that?
yeah, so when we came on the scene, the typical response was about 1 in 100 people
Okay.
would respond. Now that varies by neighborhood quite greatly, so we're sort of aggregating all of this out. Some neighborhoods very, very little, and some much higher, depending in part on their connection to the church and the local area.
Cool. So, and what would the average person donate? Like, do you have a sense of what the average donation would be for those 1 in 100 people?
When someone does donate, the typical, or I think the median value is £10. But that means because many people are not donating, you've got quite an interesting sort of statistical lineup where you deliver pretty much 1 million envelopes, but many of them come back with not returned at all or with nothing in at all. So the numbers we'll talk about today is per the amount, the pennies generated per envelope distributed, which tends to be, which as we'll see, is about you get about 30p back for all the ones that you deliver.
Cool. Okay, so we know a bit about the baseline. So can you tell us a bit about the interventions that you guys ran to try to increase either the response rate or the donation size?
Yeah, so Christian Aid came to us knowing that they wanted to apply a more scientific approach to a method that they've been trying to optimize over the years, more intuitively and more through common sense and more through collective work in placement of where their logo goes, where they talk about the fact that it's donations, they're already using through their own knowledge effectively an identifiable victim effect, a prominent placement of someone who's going to benefit from these donations. But we ran for them the first trial where there were 6 different conditions. The control condition was what they would have done in any case, and then there were different tweaks that we did to the design of that envelope, both in language and sort of logos, and as we'll see, even in the layout and the design of that envelope.
Cool. Did you say you have something that you can show us to see how the different the different layouts looked and the different envelopes looked? I think that would be super interesting.
Yeah, and I will share on screen, and it will do a good job. But I will do my best to also describe the physicality of this envelope and how it appears. Nothing beats having the sort of paper in your hand, as we'll find out. So hopefully this is on screen. So we
yeah, that's good.
We conducted a review of the literature on what affects prosocial and charitable donations. In reviewing the control envelope, we identified 6 ways in which it may be improved. I'll touch on these really quickly. There are some really fascinating findings, and if to any listener that wants to read more, I should say we published this work. If you search for Ogilvy Behavioural Science Annual, then you'll see this all written up across a few more pages. So a really interesting first technique was to talk about the labour illusion. Now, this is a sort of unseen benefit of the or a unique point for the Christian Aid donation, that unlike being posted like much direct marketing, this is hand delivered by a local volunteer, often a member of the church, but not always. And herein the insight is that perhaps donations would be driven as much by some sense of both reciprocation, that somebody has taken the time to deliver this, and often it drops on the doorstep at an unusual time of day, not with the typical post. But that is also true of some takeaway leaflets, so we might not assume that that's an absolute game changer.
That could also be something to do with, I guess you could be tapping into some kind of overhead emissions there as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. And here we've labelled it up labour illusion, but it would in truth be it's not been possible to disentangle whether it is also for listeners less familiar with the overhead aversion, that people dislike the thought of of charities undergoing costs, especially marketing costs, because I think intuitively and quite fairly they feel like they want as much of their money to be going efficiently and straight to the people in need.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, I won't go through all of these in turn, but in brief, you can see some of them are about driving the urgency, that in fact this is only a 1 week only donation opportunity, marking it up even more clearly that this is an appeal and a donation envelope, and if you were to pick it up, it does look a little bit like a leaflet, and it's not apparent that it is in fact an envelope that you slot money into. That's important for the next affordance cues technique, where we actually just flipped the orientation in such a way that the fold was more intuitive, that it was on the same orientation, so that it was clear that you drop coins or money into it.
So these things you're showing us are the actual envelopes that somebody might put money in, is that right?
Yeah, these are zoomed in screenshots of the particular aspect of it. I think if you were looking for as it would appear, the one in the bottom right hand corner is the fullest display of the front page of it. That simply uses thicker paper. So for the techies, 150 grams per square meter, which has a bit of heft to it rather than the 90 grams, which is more like your takeaway leaflet. Just to give it its dues, that fifth one is about drawing attention to gift aid, so the UK policy that you can boost your donation if you're a UK taxpayer.
Okay, all right, neat.
I'm happy to, if anyone would like to dwell as they're listening into this on what might have been most effective. We did as a team, as this trial ran for 1 week and involved the delivery of 200,000 envelopes in each condition. We had to wait patiently for several months as all the envelopes came in and were counted. We were split as a team as to what could be most effective. And we were.
Which one did you think? Which one was your money on, Pete?
I thought that the most effective would be the labour illusion in the top right-hand corner. But many people would thought, and Christian Aid wanted to test where the gift aid would be, given that that's in a way, it's a very sensible thing to drive towards to show that you can boost your donation. But it's fortunate we tested that one, because the results, as they should come on screen, the results were surprising. So on average, you get 34 pence for all the thousands per leaflet if you deliver lots of thousands of them. As we say, the median donation is £10. Might even swoop to the right-hand side to say what didn't work. And we're at pains to show what didn't work, because they are the biggest effect sizes. Flagging gift aid really did not work well at all, and seems to have. And we've got many hypotheses. It just looks like through feedback from volunteers that they felt like it became more transactional, and that it focused it more straight to the point as being a sort of selling opportunity. But to reduce it by 45% is dramatic.
Wow, yeah, that's pretty striking, isn't it?
It appears also highlighting urgency and scarcity, that donations only happen that week, also is ineffective. And maybe also goes in hand with gift aid, that in this case, the donors to a Christian Aid appeal, this doesn't mean this is everybody, but if you are one of those 1 in 100 people who would donate, you really don't like being prompted. This is that you feel like you're being sold to.
Yeah, or being told to hurry up.
Yes. So now on to the positive conditions. We saw that labeling that it was an appeal envelope was helpful. And again, this may have been helpful to people who are not the same people who didn't donate, but it may be a different group of people for whom had previously, or in tandem, weren't aware that this was an envelope. They thought it was simply a leaflet. But then these 3 other bundled conditions that were effective were fascinating. So the hand-delivered stamp worked very well by all accounts, increasing by 13%. Then the thicker paper was pretty much side by side, but a very interesting finding was that it radically increased the proportion of people donating really large sums. And by really large, I mean over £100. And
Wow.
it might well be that it signaled the oomph and the costliness of the campaign. It may also be in sort of design terms that increase the security of someone putting in a large amount of money that they otherwise might have felt uncomfortable putting it into a more flimsy envelope.
I mean, I'm kind of just amazed that anyone will send £100 in cash in the post, but yeah, I mean, that's quite astounding.
Yeah, it warms your heart. It is picked up by a volunteer, so the envelopes and leaflets are delivered,
okay.
and then they do a round and a knocking round later in the week to pick them up. Yeah, which should assuage any concerns, given it goes straight into a bag or a bucket. But it's working at some level there. Mm-hmm. The most effective was what you probably call a design thinking approach of flipping the orientation such that it was more intuitive. It's certainly, if you picked it up now, you'd see that it's more intuitive that you'd slot money into it. We don't know that for sure, because there may be other elements that the identifiable victim effect might come through more strongly. If you were to zoom in, perhaps the faces are more prominent or the eye scans along a different way. We're not able to pull all of those effects apart. But therein goes the difference between academia and a practitioner's point of view. Mm-hmm. We as practitioners certainly care about the causes of things, but when we probably sleep more soundly at night simply knowing that it worked well, we arrived at it through a theory and evidence, and exactly why it worked in that instance doesn't matter too much, but for the fact that those with a keen eye might wonder what happened if you comboed all of the green effects together and had all the labels bundled in one, which has come through in a subsequent test. I don't have the ability to show all of those results now, but suffice to say, they are a bit messy. We did not see simply adding or multiplying all of the effects together. I think that slightly goes to show, when you're dealing with response rates, sort of 1 in 100 people, we don't know if these things are happening on different thresholds, that you sort of max out a certain element of reciprocity or duty or feeling that it's easier to donate, or whether we're then reaching different people with this, and whether different effects sort of crowd each other out. So,
right. I mean, it's super interesting. The other thing that sort of springs to mind, and I guess maybe will be tested going forward, is whether the effects that you found in this trial will continue to yield these kinds of increases in people donating and average donation amounts, or whether you might also need to sort of mix things up and sort of do one intervention at one time point, but then try another intervention at another time point.
It's all very context specific, both in the simply that while these effect sizes are large, there is a larger effect of the appeal that Christian Aid choose to donate to. So in this case, they chose to go with Haiti. That's an important strategic decision and a psychological one in knowing whether it will resonate with the UK. So what they choose to do in May 2021 in the context of the COVID pandemic, for instance, will be a really, really important decision. But then it cascades down to the particular design of the envelope, whether the image is compelling, whether the press and the media attention around it, their ability to source local volunteers. And of course, there's this other element that if you can build a base of more people donating, the act of donating increases your likelihood to donate in subsequent years, effectively a loyalty effect. So some of these are virtuous cycles, and obviously if you can't hold on to your strong network, then you lose that that regularity.
Well, thanks for sharing this one with us. This is, yeah, super interesting findings. And just to point out, you may have said this already, but just to make sure that I understood this clearly, the little figures of the people and the pound sign presumably refers to changes on the number of people donating and the average donation amount. Is that the right way to understand those? The little your key on the graph of whether there's either 3 little people or a pound sign under each intervention.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, this so that is whether the frequency of donations. Thanks for asking. That's the number of people in denotes higher frequency. More people put money in, and the pound sign means they describes where they donated larger amounts. So the thicker paper didn't get people to donate more frequently. It was successful because it increased the size of that amount.
Okay. Yeah. So there's there's just lots to unpack here. It's obviously a very rich data set, and
it's very rich. On the one hand, it's as clean as simple as you get, but even clean results end up eliciting more questions than answers sometimes.
Yeah, always. Yeah. So, okay, what should we move on to? What should we talk about next? I think there was a couple of other interventions you were interested in telling us about, although I am mindful that we probably have about 5 or so minutes. So maybe we could either talk about getting people to use rubbish bins correctly, or talk about your trial with electric vehicles. Which one would you like to discuss?
I think the EVs one's a bit richer, yeah.
So so you did this while you were on secondment at the DFT, is that right?
Yes, that's right. So working with the Department for Transport, this is another really neat, quite a simple but straightforward behavioural insights trial that reveals something really interesting about both pro-social behaviour, but also the ways in which you attract interest in something that has, in this case, an environmental and social benefit, but people won't necessarily think of it in those terms. And this trial, called Make Your Next Car Electric, was published in February of this year and available online. It was run as an experiment last year for the 1 million or so people who renew their car tax and pay their vehicle tax each year. And on the thank you page, we added a little message that actually was formerly the place where you would have seen an organ donation drive message, which is quite a well-known trial run by the Cabinet Office and Behavioural Insights team. That had run its course for some number of years, and being more connected with transport, this was to direct people to information on electric vehicles, EVs. And by clicking the green button saying "Make Your Next Car Electric," you'd go to the government's website that has lots of information about how they work, and sort of introductory page for people that are interested in it.
Right, so your intervention is aimed at getting, you basically want people to click this button. That's what you're trying to get people to do in this trial.
Yeah, so we know the audience are people who have just renewed their car tax on a petrol or diesel vehicle, and we're interested in seeing what messages get those people interested in finding out more. So it's not necessarily about selling electric vehicles at this point, but it's what levers drive people to find out more. Right. And as you can imagine, these are new piece of technology, climate change, air pollution. There's lots of different angles you could come in at this. So that was why the test runs lots of different conditions. I think we see on the screen a control condition and then 7 different messages, each originating from a different lever, talking about affordability, so that the EV cost a lot to buy, but they cost much less to run, just a penny a mile. The social norms effects that thousands of people are now buying them each month. The important effect it obviously has on emissions in the environment. Then cascading from that, the health effects of the people attributed to of the fatalities caused by air pollution. What you might call an informative message or a hook that last year there was a consultation on when petrol and diesel vehicles would be phased out. So the date at which, in about a decade's time, at that point it was 2035, that you wouldn't be able to buy a new one. Then there's talk about the product benefits of the ease of charging and how they can be charged at home easily, which isn't always known, and then the rapidly expanding network of chargers that are across cities and motorway service stations, so that you can make those long journeys as well as short ones. So again, this
how
has
many
been one...
people? Sorry to jump in. How many people saw what was your kind of sample size? Sorry if you mentioned that already, but how many people were you able to send these different prompts to?
This was seen in each condition by, again, about 200,000 people. Okay. So the total number of people renewing each year seeing this message was over 1 million. And as we'll see, the click-through rate on that button was somewhere in the region of 3 or 4%.
Cool. So what did you find? Show us, I mean, you probably had some, did you have some priors also in this one about what you thought might be most effective?
There's relatively scant evidence on what elicits interest in EVs. It's such a diverse group of people, some of whom are interested but not ready to buy, some people for whom money makes the biggest difference. We've presented this, like the Christian Aid work, to many colleagues, and it definitely divides opinion. The people working, and this is an important point, the people closest to EVs, I would say, are the ones most likely to drive towards talk of affordability of the charge network, because that's something they're pushing towards. And there may not be, as we've seen the results, they might not be wrong to do that with people who are engaged in EVs, but here the audience is someone who has maybe not thought of it at all. And one of the points is we need to widen our toolkit and see the way you hook someone in might not be the same might not be the same reason that they go on to do it, and it might not be the same reason that you sort of convert a sale in this point. Yeah. So the results were that some of the conditions again were not effective and are worse than a very simple message. So that remembering the control messages, information is available on electric vehicles. We really struggle to make anything much drier than that. So talking about the charge point availability, the ease of charging and the cost running costs are worse than that message. People either skim over it, they think they've heard it all before, they don't think it's relevant to them. It just doesn't seem to work very well. But what does work better is talking about traffic and carbon emissions. So that was not significantly different to the control. So it's sort of pound for pound the same. But in talking about air pollution, talking about how many people are picking norms of new drivers, and then most effective, the talking about being ready for the phase out of petrol and diesel vehicles.
Right. So is this sort of, again, in a way, emphasizing the prosocial aspects of electric cars? For example, the carbon emissions doesn't really prompt people to find out more about them.
That's right, yeah. So the analogy would be, if you wanted someone to do something, it would be no better than saying information is available on this thing. It doesn't act as a hook. Now, it's quite hard to pull these ones apart. It does very much seem like the way you draw someone in is that you need to give them some new information they might not otherwise know, and there's a novelty aspect that brings someone to click to find out more. That would be, I think, fair to say that the air pollution numbers, the social norms messages, and the "Are you ready for this?" all constitute something new to people. And the emissions part on an EV is really quite well known.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's hard for me to reflect on this now that I know the outcome, but in I in hindsight, it sort of seems to me like I probably would be more likely to click on something where there's I'm getting a bit of information, or your car might be decommissioned soon, or you might not be able to drive your car soon. I kind of want to know more about that, right? Whereas maybe being told that electric cars are cheaper, or there are charge points, is sort of you're getting the information you need at that time, and maybe don't feel that you need to click again to find out more at that precise moment.
Yeah, exactly. And when we put ourselves in the shoes of the people clicking on this message, they have just paid some £700 to renew their car tax to keep driving their petrol or diesel car. So it's reasonable to go to the "Are you ready?" message, and it's not to stop that. The phase out date is to phase out the sale of new vehicles. So if you have one, then there's no suggestion you wouldn't be able to keep driving it. What we're looking to test in a second round of this messaging is to just see if we can use levers to try and tie together the fact that EVs are exempt from road tax, and whether there's any new information that the costliness that loomed large in someone just renewing their road tax would be adjusted, so that when you say thank you, you go, did you know if next year you came back and this was an EV, you wouldn't have to pay for this fee.
Right. Yeah. And I guess I don't know if you have plans to do this, but another interesting thing to know might be the extent to which people who do go and find out more information about the electric vehicles, who click the green button, does that then change their intention to buy, or does it make them more interested in buying an electric vehicle? And so I suppose that, I don't know if you're thinking along those lines as well, or whether you can capture that.
Yeah, definitely thinking along those lines. And with a marketing mindset, you see a real difference between the level of data that often a commercial or private sector can obtain by having logins to websites and tracking. Here on gov.uk site, and for fair reason, it's not possible to attribute and know who was clicking on what. If it was people with particularly polluting vehicles that were more interested or not, in age or in demographic or in location. Unfortunately, we don't have that insight this time, and we won't in the future, which I think goes to show the limits of field trials, where you need to combine these mass big samples where you can't collect and obtain all this detailed information. That you might also run a much smaller trial, a messaging test trial, for instance, where you recruit a few thousand participants and they're happy to share their information, as it's more hypothetical. Again, actually, much like the diversity of levers you might pull, you sort of need a diversity of methods, because no one tool is going to reveal everything you need.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, like maybe you do to some extent see some limits, but I think this also really shows the massive power of these huge N samples that you're able to collect, and these like at scale interventions that you're able to run is sort of extremely powerful and interesting. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, thank you.
If you don't mind, and I think we can take a minute or two, I think it would be interesting to end on a more reflective note, and maybe just take a step back from these case studies and ask you, as a behavioural scientist, as somebody who's working in this field, I think it's fair to say that behavioural science has taken a bit of a battering in the public eye, and also among scientists who are doing behavioural science, in particular in response to the role that behavioural science did or didn't play in our own coronavirus pandemic response. I'd be quite interested to hear from you, as someone who works in this field and who obviously sees the value in behavioural science approaches to solving these kinds of large-scale problems. what you think the kind of the future for behavioral sciences, or what you would take from the kind of what's happened over the last year with behavioral science, and where do you see the kind of the limits or the low-hanging fruit for behavioral science?
Yeah, it's certainly a topical question. I think it will be for months and years to come. It does appear in the past year that the spotlight has come onto behavioral science. To the non-behavioral scientists, I think it takes two to tango. One, a great level of expectation was put upon the capacity of behavioral science as a method, or almost a silver bullet, to save us all from impending doom. It takes some responsibility to know the limits of behavioral science, both in the quality of evidence you have when something happens so fast, the ability to use generalized theory and models of behavior in a specific situation, and the capacity, and whether it's advisable to use, I'll get to why this is a strange thing, but whether behavioral science moves in the space of persuasion and guidance, where traditional levers of fines, penalties, laws, and regulations might be the most powerful or more appropriate techniques. So it takes non-behavioral scientists to be careful and not get caught up in over setting expectations. It obviously then needs behavioral scientists to not overclaim what's possible. It also takes then behavioral scientists to say, as well as persuasion techniques, communications, framing, prosociality, identity, all of these techniques that sit more in the toolkit of behavioral science, to also move into a space of saying, well, if these are going to be laws and regulations, how do we maximize their effect? So how do we frame a law or a fine in a way that conveys the best message and the best reappraisal of that behavior? How do we target it and make sure the people for whom this law and fine or whatever is intended definitely know about it, and maybe they talk about it and it has both the rational effect of, is it worth the chance of getting caught, or and also it has the sort of reputational effects. I think it would be great if behavioral science embedded itself a little bit more deeply into helping maximize the power of traditional policy levers that are still there to go, rather than sit on the sidelines and say that there are nudge or persuasion techniques that work, that are zero cost and work just as well, and do them instead. So where we've talked about, for instance, this isn't about coronavirus, but in the case of electric vehicles, it takes both persuasion messages, but also understanding of the grants that are available, of making it easy to apply for home chargers, and to understand all of the levers that you might pull there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's like super interesting perspective, and just sort of, I guess like seeing behavioral science as just one tool in a massive toolbox, and not the kind of silver bullet solution to things, is definitely, like I would share that view as well. Right. Thank you so much for your time, Pete, and thank you for talking us through these really interesting case studies that you have been involved in. And I look forward to seeing you next time on Changing Minds. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Cheers.